How's it going, everybody? Are we doing good? Why don't we give another round of applause to Ashley for that talk? That was incredible. I hope that I still provide some, promise for the future of JavaScript, or at least in terms, as we're concerned as an open source project. So today, this talk is called Webpack, Building a Platform. So how many here today use Webpack? Look around. How many here know how it works? I'm proud of the ones who raised their hand. No. That's okay. This is talking about a platform. People build platforms to ensure you don't have to understand how these things work. So my name is Sean Larkin. I'm a program manager at Microsoft. I work on Edge dev tools and work for Microsoft Edge. About 50% of my time, I'm also working across the entire company with what we call internal partners, or other teams, software engineers who are using tools like Webpack and helping them understand how to make performance a first-class citizen. The web is really new to us at Microsoft. But you might know me as one of the maintainers of Webpack. And I'm not the only maintainer here today, so if you have an opportunity, Juho Vepsalainen and Johannes Ewald, where are you? Raise your hands. Are you hiding? Maybe they didn't show up today. They're back there, I see them. Stop and say hi to them as well. I spent a little bit of time on the Angular CLI. Who uses the Angular CLI? Oh, awesome. I helped bring Webpack to the Angular ecosystem through the CLI. And now I'm just a general open source evangelist, on top of this, and working with the WebAssembly W3C community group in addition to the Node.js Foundation's module group. So a little bit about myself, if you haven't heard this story before. I'm a tech support rep gone rogue. I got tired of not being able to solve people's problems. It was so frustrating every day to take calls and say, no, you have to do these steps and work around your issue. And so I learned how to program. I started with things like AppleScript, and then learned Ruby, Objective-C, and then I fell in love with JavaScript. And you can find me at any of these places at the Larkin. So feel free to add me, it doesn't matter. Shoot me a message. DMs are always open. So building a platform. What does this mean? What does it mean to build a platform? So you might have realized that, let's say, from February 25th, we've now shipped Webpack 4 for about 6 months, almost, 5 months. Who's using Webpack 4 today? Beautiful, that's excellent. So you've seen the speed benefits it provides. So this was a really special, major version change for us. It not only represented a lot of breaking changes that we had for the ecosystem, but this was the first time that we named a major version. So we called it Webpack Legato. And if you're a music major like myself, you know that Legato has a special meaning to it. In music, it means to play notes together in a smooth or flowing fashion. And this was actually given to us by the company Trivago. Who knows who Trivago is? Today, you're going to walk away knowing exactly who they are. So Trivago is Webpack's #1 sponsor for our project. And we reached out to them and said, hey, we would love for you to give the next version of Webpack a name. And so they said this. At Trivago, we usually give our projects a name with a musical theme. For example, our old JavaScript framework is called Harmony. Our new framework is called Melody. And on the PHP side, we have Symphony with a layer on top called Orchestra. Legato means to play each note in sequence without gaps. Webpack bundles our entire front end without gaps, JavaScript, CSS. And so we believe Legato is a perfect fit. And so when we heard that, we were like, oh my gosh. Thank you. We agree. But it's not just Trivago. If you see a company here that you work for, this is who makes Webpack today possible. All of these people are backers and sponsors. So if you know them, you can raise your hand, but give them a round of applause because we would not be here today if it wasn't for these people. So much so that it has allowed us to expense over $32,000 in the last few months to our ecosystem who contributes to our project. If you did not know, when you contribute to Webpack or any of the 100 repositories across our organization, we would track intuitively how much time you would spend each month. And we'd send an email that said, thank you so much for your contributions. We want to give you an opportunity to expense this time, for a certain amount of money. And so people would either choose to go ahead and do so on our Open Collective page, or they would give it to another organization like Black Girls Who Code. But in the bottom line, to see $32,000 that's supporting the infrastructure of our project is incredible. And not only that, 1,000 individual contributors since January, increasing. So Webpack 4. We wanted to define kind of like a theme for what it meant to us and how we were going to really enhance things for you. So the first step was smaller and faster builds. And they're kind of contradictory in a concept, right? And the second is modernization. Like, how can we improve our code base to make it more contributable, in addition to adding new architectures that would lend itself to more improvements in the future? And then finally, developer experience. This is the most important part, right? This is what can make or break the difference in a great CLI experience, or just using any tool made in JavaScript. And so I want to talk about first smaller and faster builds. So if you have a smaller build, right, or if you want to have a smaller build, you have to do a deeper analysis of the code. You're going to have to process more of the module graph. But to have a faster build, or faster anything in programming, you're going to have to do less work, or reuse work that's already done. So already we were kind of, puzzled on how we were going to solve this. But we started with faster builds. We completely rewrote parts of our architecture, like the chunk graph, responsible for creating bundles and the relationship between bundles. And then rewriting it from the ground up allowed us to drop or add different features for Webpack. But most importantly, one of the things we saw as kind of one of the first steps was taking Uglify.js and using the Uglify ES new package and leveraging its parallelism and caching. This made a huge difference for us. And then finally, things like moving away from objects and arrays and leveraging the new data types that ECMAScript 2015 or 6 afforded to us, like maps, like sets. But most importantly, the biggest contribution to trying to have a faster building system for Webpack was completely rewriting our plugin system. Now, what's really awesome is that Ashley talked about that same blog post by Egorov, or Vyacheslav Egorov. And it kind of has to do with monomorphism and polymorphism in JavaScript, right? And so we use this technique to rewrite our entire plugin system to have monomorphic functions. And so what does this mean? So if you look at this code here, you're going to see that, I'll use the pointer, that this is a method in which any class that a plugin listens to will emit an event. And these events can be as many arguments as you want, as you can see. However, there's no way to cache the function calls for this. And so this makes it hard for JavaScript engines to optimize. And so we kind of toiled over this for a little bit. We're like, what are we going to do? What kind of technique could we use? And so the first thing that we tried was we took and separated functions out and made them individually unique by the amount of parameters that they are going to take. But there are thousands and thousands of permutations of these different kind of calls in Webpack that would make it impossible to maintain a plugin system like that. And so We use this technique called lazy compiling, and it's just a buzzword, because we're just evaling a function at the bottom. We're just calling eval, but it spits out a new monomorphic function deterministically based on the combination of hooks, whether it's async, and then whether there's anything plugging into it, in addition to how many arguments that it's going to be passing data through. And so if you wanted to learn more about this, I don't know, did you see this exact same post? I don't think it was this one, but we'll see the next one. Vyacheslav Egorov writes in depth about monomorphic performance in JavaScript. And so if you want to learn more about this, this is a great read. But if you're on Twitter, or heck, I don't even have to say that. I can just reference Ashley's talk earlier and say, this same person tweeted out, maybe you don't need Rust and WASM to speed up your JavaScript, right? Does this sound familiar? Well, if he dives into the technique, you'll see, of course, that code looks familiar once we read it. And Tobias, the author of Webpack, we use the same trick. So you'll look, if you read further, you'll find out that they were using the exact same technique that we're leveraging, creating this templated function and evaluating it. However, Ashley made a great point. This is really unreadable for your average code base. And as V8 Senpai says, you'll hear him talk later, don't do this at home. Is that right? Don't do it at home. That's right. Good. This is something that's only going to be valuable for code bases that are executing functions or calling them millions, if not billions of times. And so we were nervous to approach this architecture, but as Benedict says, I don't know how you got away with it. It works. So was it worth breaking our entire ecosystem? Right? Because we had to write every plugin from the ground up. I would say so. We saw, on average, 98% faster builds across the entire ecosystem. 98%. And we weren't I wasn't sold on that yet. I wanted to be sure. And so this was actually a project we tested. So a user of the Angular CLI approached us and allowed us to help profile their builds, starting before and after this plugin system change. And so initially it says 6 hours, but this was a 9-hour build, right? It was creating thousands and thousands of bundles. And we were able to get it down to 17 minutes. And that's just scratching the surface. This was before we even shipped Webpack 4 final. So 17 minutes. But I wasn't sold on it yet. I was in Iceland at the time, and I said, can somebody please, I would really like you to test out Webpack 4 beta. And a pro tip is that if you ever want anybody to try your tool, just bribe them to be in a Medium article with their tweets included. So I got lots of responses, as you can see. But did we actually still see this 98%? It's pretty dang close. For some, we saw 75% on average. For others, we saw 85, 90% increase in speed. And not only that, but you can tell simple things like caching between production builds so that minification, you don't have to reuse that work, were really valuable. And so that's kind of speed in a nutshell, but we still had to have smaller builds, right? We still had to optimize for what is the most important part about loading a web page is the amount of JavaScript you ship on the initial download. And so there were just small things that we found easy to optimize once we had new architectures in place. For example, we were awarded a grant by Mozilla to implement WebAssembly as a first-class citizen. Now, adding WebAssembly to us was super exciting, not just because we believe in WebAssembly and its capabilities, but because it allowed us to open up our architecture to do things like treating JSON as a first-class citizen. And specifically what this allowed us to do is treat JSON like an ECMAScript module. Really, JSON is a stricter subset of JavaScript, no? And so we could treat each property like a named import. And therefore, out of the box, we will prune out any exports that aren't used if you simply just import your JSON file. We found this to be hugely impactful because this was already a common pattern being used across the ecosystem. And so now people saw bundles reduced just by removing dead JSON strings, 200 kilobytes, 400 kilobytes. And then specifically, one of the largest impactful things that we were able to accomplish comes with a little bit of a backstory. So the Harmony module specification has a rule that states, regardless of if an export is used or not, as you are re-importing, you have to evaluate and execute every single named export or default export. So that means that in this specific example, in Webpack 3, we had to include everything in the bundle to stay specification compliant. And the reason that this was is in case side effects were to, at that re-export level, would create a dependency between each other. So what we did is we came up with this flag called side effects false. It's just a compiler trick that allows Webpack to know that it can discard unused exports because they're writing pure modules. And so John David Dalton, one of my coworkers on Microsoft Edge, I asked him, I said, hey, before we release Webpack 4, can I land this side effects false feature into Lodash and Lodash ES? And he said, okay. At the time, we had called it pure module, but functional programmers yelled at us, and so we changed it to side effects. And so look at the difference. The top is Webpack 3, minimized, using one import. And then in Webpack 4, without any changes, except to Lodash as a library. Over 200K from a single library. So we were kind of floored. And you can see JDD was extremely floored as well. So I mean, now that we think about it, all you have to do is tree shake and mangle your exports and scope hoist and minimize, and then package authors just have to set side effects. Right? Sounds easy. No, that's ridiculous. Are you serious? You should just run Webpack. You should. So much that in Webpack 4, we decided to make the decision to default as much as humanly possible. So all of those things that I just said are happening here in this example. But what you'll notice is that there is no configuration in the sidebar. We now believe that this is something that you should have out of the box by default. And that kind of leads us to developer experience. Now you don't have to have a Webpack config to get started. So this means that we can now take a term like zeroconfig that Parcel coined, and we can turn it into our own, like 0CJS. Zeroconfig to us doesn't mean letting you do anything you want without ever touching a configuration. In fact, we consider this a bad architecture. You should have a way to easily extend yourself. And Webpack is rooted in extensibility. To us, we think that, like, if we're rooted in extensibility, how can we take 0CJS a step further, right? So instead of having issues where we see problems where small, minor patch changes could cause everything to break in your package, we wanted to keep a slim core and do things simpler. So zeroconfig to us means extending the ability for you to define what zeroconfig means. So you get to bring your own zeroconfig. You get to define what it means for your company, for your workflow, for your ecosystem, and for your framework. And this is all brought to you by features like mode that we added in Webpack. By default now, we added a new property or feature called mode. Mode, by default, is set to production. And it really is the foundation for everything that we're going to do in the future. For mode, you can choose development, which is going to optimize for fast builds. It's going to optimize for incremental compilation. It's going to give you readable source code that you can understand. And then production is going to have, of course, the scope hoisting, the tree shaking, the small output size, the secure identifiers in your bundles, no exposing source code or names, and easy-to-use assets. And so who's in the Angular ecosystem? Do you remember this tombstone? This is when they say, and we're killing scope. Do you remember that? But no, even better. So we decided in Webpack 4 to get rid of the Commons Chunk plugin. If you've ever used it, you know how frustrating it was to try to synthetically create something like a vendor bundle, right? But the reason why is we, time after time, have started to notice that people were worrying about things like vendor bundles and not code splitting. I'm going to be publishing an article soon with Nolan Lawson saying the death of vendor bundles, because we don't want you to create them anymore. All they do is optimize for your network delivery. But the true cost in the browser for JavaScript is the amount of JavaScript you're shipping on the initial download. So using tools like code splitting out of the box, which requires no config, is what we want to continue to encourage people to use along the way, and not something like this. And then finally, one of my favorite features that we worked on, this was with Sam Ciccone. He's the harbor master at Google who works on all their internal build systems. Sam helped us create a plugin called the profiling plugin. And so what this does is it allows you to pull out, in your config, you can add a plugin from Webpack called webpack.debug.profiling plugin. And instantly, you're going to be able to get a data.json stream that you can drop into Chrome Timeline Viewer. And you can see per plugin exactly what is taking the longest in your builds. Sure, this may be more exciting to us, right? Because we want to help you solve problems with slowness. But this also is going to streamline the process for us. And then finally, modernization and re-architecture. So the first thing that we did was have to implement this module type architecture. To support WebAssembly as a first-class citizen, we in Webpack had to stop treating everything like JavaScript. We had to start having other asset types. And so what we did is we implemented and stripped out any of our code generation that was specific to JavaScript and made it generic. This allowed us to actually remove things like the extract text plugin, or allowed us to have WASM as a first-class citizen. And even more importantly, take an example like this. This is called Walt. It looks like TypeScript, but it compiles to WebAssembly. And so with a simple loader in Webpack, just by simply importing that file and using it like a JavaScript module, you get all the benefits of WebAssembly with none of the ergonomic problems around it. Because why should you have to care? And then finally dropping Node 4 support. We were so happy about this. We got to finally convert the rest of our code to ES6. We removed a lot of slow and old code patterns. And now finally, for those who are V8, Node version 8 and up users of Webpack, we can opt you into features that allow us to use WebAssembly under the hood. And this is just scratching the surface. Like, if you haven't tried Webpack yet today or upgraded to Webpack 4, we encourage you to do so. Because there's so many different things and benefits that come with these three ideas. Smaller and faster builds, modernization, and of course, developer experience. Now, even so much, this entire development cycle usually lasts about 6 months. But what was exciting for us is that we prioritized our time to work with frameworks to ensure that out of the box, your CLIs, your development experiences would automatically get Webpack 4 without you having to do anything. And so much that it is stable with Angular 6 and their CLI today. So you can get it. And we wanted to validate, like, Sean, is it worth it? So like I said, I spend about 50% of my time across Microsoft working with other teams who are using Webpack and trying to upgrade or solving different problems or creating services around it. It turns out that Webpack is the third most used open source JavaScript library at Microsoft. And so this is Ken Chaw, who is a development lead for the Outlook web app. Hands down, probably one of the largest web applications I've seen to date, and is a single-page app, or two single-page apps, technically, your calendar and the actual inbox. And so instantly from upgrading, you can see our conversation here. We wanted this team to be one of our first dog fooders of Webpack 4. And the response was overwhelming. To be able to save, almost 80 seconds? On a 150-plus developer team, that can mean tens of millions of dollars per month in developer time saved. So for us, it's this kind of value that's so exciting. Because if we can prove that it works at Microsoft, then it works for you. Because we use the same tools that you use every day. Is Webpack the kernel of the front? I'm not Torvalds, but I always think this slide is funny. So what's our goal? What are we trying to do now? This is called building a platform, no? What's the future look like? We have ideas for just beyond 4. We want to have things like CSS as a first-class citizen, HTML as a first-class citizen. We want you to be able to have HTML as an entry point. Parcel gave us a great idea for that, and to take it a step further. But even more so, it's stabilizing WebAssembly support. What's so cool is that the ECMAScript or the Harmony module specification is now also being adopted by WebAssembly, or it's very similar. And so therefore, we can do the same treatments that we do with JavaScript. We can tree shake it. We can hoist it. We can split it out. We could code split WASM if we wanted to. But even more so, what if we could create a preset system? Like I said, bring your own 0CJS. What if it means that you could take, just by defining a tiny package that just says, oh, I can use TypeScript. And instantly, without having to do anything, without needing a configuration, you automatically have those setups or specifications that you need for your build system. And then finally, beyond Webpack 4, Webpack 5, maybe even 6, depending on how difficult these things are, we need to have fully persistent caching. Currently, we don't today. We only have it for our minification process. And so adding this feature raises the ceiling extremely high for us, not only for persistent builds, but distributed build systems, right? We could take a single base build and output a temporary format that 100 other servers could consume and use to finish out tiny build processes. And then also multi-threading. This is another piece that just keeps our ceiling nice and high for continuing to increase the performance of Webpack. And then moving all of our module types to stable. And then finally, we want to make this idea of creating a first-class citizen module type easier. So like, can we have an API for it? But I mean, at the end of the day, this stuff is not going to matter unless it's something that you want. If you've never been to this page before, you can go to webpack.js.org/vote. Every single person here who has a GitHub account gets 1 vote a day. And this is our roadmap. We believe in open sourcing the governance of our project. Because we are not owned or controlled by any single company. We have backers and we have sponsors. But at the end of the day, we are who you are. We are a grassroots project who believes in solving things for developers and nobody else. So building a platform. I've said this multiple times. I wanted to elaborate on it, right? A platform is a group of technologies that are used as a base upon other applications, right? Processes or technologies that are developed. In personal computing, a platform is basic hardware and software on which other things can run. Now, that was kind of generic. I was like, oh, okay. Then I looked to business explanations of what this meant, because I really wanted to tie this idea together. A platform is a business model that creates a value by facilitating exchanges between two or more interdependent groups, usually consumers and producers. In order to make these exchanges happen, platforms harness and create large, scalable networks of users and resources that can be accessed on demand. And that was the part that excited me. How can we build on this? I mean, JavaScript itself is the greatest platform play, and you may not even know it, right? Today, in combination with NPM, our ecosystem, in what language can you write syntax that doesn't exist yet? There isn't any. But you get to do that here. And we want to be the new LLVM for this ecosystem. We want to be the underlying kernel, the compiler, the toolchain. And why? Because building on a platform means that when you create a framework, it's conscious of the tooling that exists in the ecosystem. One of the things I love most about Vue.js is that it is also, ironically, a grassroots project not owned by a company that exists to serve nothing but developers also. And you might say that's why Vue.js is so hot right now. But how does it differ from the other options that are in the ecosystem? Well, for one, everything that Vue.js does is built on top of Webpack as a platform. Their single-file component system is powered by a loader. When you use the Vue CLI, you get hot module replacement out of the box. And you expect it, because the loader is consciously wrapping everything in hot module replacement code. You don't have to do any of that. On top of that, it's the first framework to offer what I consider first-class code splitting. You could go through your entire application, and anywhere that you register a component not only takes an instance of that component, but it takes a function that returns a dynamic import. Unfortunately, with other frameworks, they have to work within their company's existing entrenched architectures. But instead, something like this that's grassroots gets to only think about the developers in mind to solve their problems. And so what if we took it even further? I showed this slide in London, and they didn't think it was too soon. Good job to the Croatian team, though. Hrvatska. Hrvatska! Sorry. Okay. How are we going to leverage developer platforms to solve more things for our teams at Microsoft? Right? So we use the same tools that everybody else does today. We write with the same code bases. We don't have these crazy architectures that entrench us in only choosing certain solutions. That's where I think Microsoft stands alone. It's why we are so ahead in the open source ecosystem. It's because we have doubled down on open source. And so now we can create solutions and innovate around the things that you use, and not only solve it for us, but solve it for you. That's what I think true open source is. Well, what platforms do we have? Who uses VS Code? Who uses TypeScript or GitHub? Who uses Azure? And we know about Webpack. I say that, I put a star next to it because at the end of the day, if it solves a problem for Microsoft, it's going to solve it for you all, like I said. But we will always choose an altruistic option when it comes to the direction of our open source project, because we're not controlled by Microsoft. So I want to show you a little demo of how we could take it further. Now, warning, this is vaporware, okay? This is not a Microsoft product. This is not a Microsoft project. And this is something that I'm hacking on myself. One of the largest things, my senior PM went to me and said, Sean, you've spent a year across Microsoft working with these teams. How could you spend time creating or coming up with a solution that combines all the platforms that we're creating today? Right? And so I have this very simple project here. It's not doing anything fancy, but what you'll see here is that we're able to use all of the features that we would like to, modules. We could use any packages we want. Technically, but look, there's something that's different here. There is no node modules folder. There is no package JSON. You're literally just using your favorite editor, which at Microsoft unites all of our teams. And you're using it to start development for the first time, or to even spin up a new project. So what would it mean to take a platform like Webpack and build it into a language server into VS Code? Would it mean that if I was to update text, I instantly see the feedback? Or would it instead mean that if I went and changed this to, let's say, my Webpack Academy workshop, and opened a completely different project? As a developer, you shouldn't even have to worry about the build system, right? We want to make it an incredible experience standalone, but what if it just automatically compiled for you? What's the requisite? You just need a Webpack config? At the end of the day, the idea is that we take the tools that we all love because it solves problems for us, and we innovate around them. And so this is a project that I'm going to be working on for a hackathon. But it's vaporware. Nothing exists. It's a private repository. But take this away and walk away and say, how can I build on any JavaScript as a platform? Let's find the slides again. There we go. So you may not see that coming to open source soon. But think about it. You did nothing. You got all the benefits of having your workspace. One of the criticisms I commonly give for things like StackBlitz and Code Sandbox is that they take Monaco from VS Code, but they deprive users of all the richness of the integrations of VS Code. This is kind of like bringing it back home without needing an internet connection. Could we take it further? There is my demo slide. But now, if we're running Webpack behind the scenes, what else could we do? Could we automatically run Chrome coverage reports and say, hey, this import could be changed to a dynamic import. And you could code split it and save 40 kilobytes and have code actions and code completions provided for you. We could do that. Because today, runtime diagnostics lack the understanding of your graph, your dependency graph, or your build system. And in the same way, your build system lacks the static analysis to understand if something's actually used in your code base, essentially runtime stats. These kind of experiences bridge them together. And so I have 3 features that this will have, but I can't talk about the last one. You should be able to develop and diagnose exactly what's going on with minimal effort. And, at the end of the day, this is what I love about JavaScript. Like I said, we're in a renaissance. Every 2 weeks, we could get a new framework. That's a great thing, though. Like I said, in what language can you write syntax that doesn't exist and try it at stage 0? Stage 0. So try Webpack today, even if it's Webpack 4. Build your own CLI, build your own wrapper, build your own service on top of our platform, or even build your own framework, because it could be the next hottest framework like Vue. And let us know what you think. Thank you.